share my screen and hopefully can find the right slides. So it sounds like, Matot, this is the first class, is that right, of the series or no?
Yes.
It is. Okay. I'm certainly, I would be curious to know. I haven't seen the whole agenda and we'll want to maybe come back and listen to what others have to present, have to say. But so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about this idea of biophilia. So as the intro suggests, I teach in an urban planning department in a school of architecture, trained as an urban planner, thinking a lot about cities. And a lot of my own work has been around sustainability in cities, resilient cities, and increasingly we recognize the need really for cities to rise to the occasions. We're facing some pretty daunting challenges when you think about climate change and how cities are going to have to already adapt pretty quickly at the same time uh, working to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and on the mitigation side. To do all those things really requires, we believe, compact and dense cities. If we're going to design walkable cities, cities where we invest in transit, they've got to be compact and dense. So it raises a question, can you in fact have density and compactness, but also have that connection with nature? And we believe yes. So there's a question mark on this slide. Take that question mark away. We very much are going to argue tonight that you can have those things. You must in fact have the density, compactness, and nature. So it builds importantly on this idea of biophilia. And I'm hoping that's a term that you've heard before. Here is one definition from E.O. Wilson. It's essentially the idea that we have this innate connection to nature, this innate affiliation, that we've co-evolved with the natural world, and to be a truly happy and healthy and to lead meaningful lives, we need nature. It's not something optional. It's absolutely essential, and it has to be all around us where we live and work, where we're spending most of our time. It can't just be something that we get on a holiday a couple of times a year. So that's the key idea. Um, E.O. Wilson wasn't the first person to use the word biophilia, but he's really the one who's coined it in this way. So around 2010 or so, we started this thing called the Biophilic Cities Project at UVA, which later led to this Biophilic Cities Network. And this is something Carla's been involved in from the very beginning. So she has been one of our sort of inaugural leaders and staff for this network and continues to work on it. And she'll tell you more about that. I'm not going to go through a lot of the evidence because I think Carla is going to talk about this in great detail. I'll only just say that this idea that we connect with nature, that we have this innate draw, this innate affiliation to nature, I think for me, it is demonstrated on a daily basis or an hourly basis, if you will. When you think about the things that you're drawn to, the things that make us happy, that give us delight, they are these kinds of things. They are flowers and trees and butterflies and water and the sounds of things like water and birds. I'm going to talk quite a bit later on about birds. And there is this growing body of evidence. Almost weekly, it seems, there is a new study. This is one, Carla may talk about this in greater depth, but a study in bioscience showing the relationship between the presence of nature and reported lower levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. And all of this evidence around forest bathing and showing that at the end of a walk through a forest, our stress hormone levels go down and we get a boost to our immune system and we feel better. Our mood is more positive. Our cognitive functioning is greater. And it's connected, we believe, to this idea of biophilia. And so we don't know exactly what's going on. There is an emerging science here. The image on the right is all about the idea of fractals. These are shapes and forms in nature, these self-repeating shapes in nature, the idea that a leaf is a small version of a bow, which is a small version of the larger tree. And the argument, it's a quote from Richard Taylor, we've gotten to know, who's the chair of the physics department at the University of Oregon, who's done all this wonderful work on fractals, that we've evolved a visual system to effortlessly process those fractals, those natural shapes. And the image on the left, really innovative project from the UK where they're using birdsong to detect hearing loss. All to remind me to just make the pitch, and I'll maybe circle back to this when I talk about birds, but birdsong is something we know the evidence is growing that it really does have this positive effect on us and for us. So all these things that Carla is going to talk about, I think, in greater detail, it is a huge task to try to summarize the literature. All of those things on the right are, in fact, connected in one way or another to the presence of nature. And Carla and I are frequently talking about this in terms of the word flourishing, which is a wonderful word that captures the qualities of nature, the things that nature delivers, that it's not just the pleasure and the delight, it's purpose and meaning and connection, all these things that make life really wonderful. So we want cities that are natureful, and that's the main argument that I'm making here. We're making that cities, the future of cities is a natureful one. It is a biophilic one, and it has to be. It needs to be. And we have all of these challenges that cities are facing. This is an image, by the way, from Rotterdam. We like to say that a natureful city, a biophilic city, anything that makes a city more biophilic will also make it more resilient. So in Rotterdam, much of that challenge has to do with water. So they are investing, for example, in installation of green rooftops, or the image second from the left, the idea of a water plaza, water square, that provides more a space for a city, more gathering space for neighborhoods, but at the same time designed to collect and retain stormwater. So there is this emerging movement around biophilic design. Much of that is focused at the building scale. It's quite exciting, and it's been largely driven by the architectural world. This is a new building in Toronto, and Brian Brisbane, an architect that we've gotten to know, and this is essentially a forested vertical tower. And a lot of wonderful examples of biophilic buildings that are bringing nature into the center, and in this case, creating a wonderful living environment for people in this tower, but also creating a kind of vertical park for the residents who live in this neighborhood. So we have wonderful case studies of buildings, of biophilic buildings. This is another one from Pittsburgh, the Phipps Conservatory's Center for Sustainable Landscapes. By the way, along the way, one of the things that we've been doing is making short documentary films about a number of exemplary biophilic projects. And so we have a new film, 5 or 6 minute film about this building. And I'd love for you to take a look at that. And Carla and I will probably mention this webpage multiple times, but do take a look at biophilic-cities.org. That's our main page for Biophilic Cities for the network. And there is a film page that has all of these films, and a number of them that I'm going to mention here along the way. So we believe, though, a biophilic city, this vision of biophilic cities is more than simply a city that has lots of biophilic buildings. That's really important, and we know we spend a lot of time inside, right? So bringing that nature into the center, into the interior spaces of where we live and work is really important. But we believe biophilic cities is much more than that. It's everything from room or rooftop all the way out to region or bioregion, and all of those spaces in between. And it is a city that facilitates the connection to nature and to each other. It's also a city that understands it has an important role to play in addressing global conservation. So one of the key attributes of a future city for us is one that shares space with other species. It's a multi-species city, a biodiverse city. And as a result of that, it's also a city that cares about that nature and works to coexist with many other forms of life. So there's an ethical dimension to this as well. So this vision is a holistic vision of a natureful city. This is an image of a building in Singapore. Singapore is one of our original partner cities in the Biophilic Cities network, and it's a city that has called itself a garden city for many, many years. And recently they've shifted their language and for a while calling themselves a city in a garden, which captures sort of the essence of our vision, which is that you don't just want to imagine cities where there are places of nature, parks and designated spots that you visit, but rather we want to see the whole city as a natural system, as an ecosystem, which it is. And increasingly in Singapore, they are now describing themselves as a city in nature, and even a biophilic city in nature, which maybe seems a little bit redundant, but we kind of like that redundancy. And adopting and implementing a whole host of planning policies to implement this vision, including something called the landscape replacement policy. So this buildings like this one more than replace the nature lost from the footprint of the building, the ground level nature, with vertical nature. So this is sky parks and green rooftops and green walls and flowing nature, you see here. This is a Wohod design. Wohod is an architectural firm based in Singapore that we've gotten to know, and we love their work. So if I had a little more time, we could have an hour or two conversation about what constitutes a biophilic city. These are some of the main sort of themes. Immersive nature. We want a city where we are immersed in nature, where the nature is integrated, continuous, and seamless. And it is about connecting the built and natural environments together, right? So a lot of this is human designed nature, that green roof or that green wall. It's biodiverse and multi-species. It's whole of city, again, rooftop to region or bioregion and all of the levels in between. It is whole of life. So someone growing up in a biophilic city is exposed to nature at a very early age and enjoys that nature all the way through to the senior years of one's life. It's a just and inclusive city, and it's a city that facilitates a culture of biophilia. Just another slide to make the same point that this is an integrated, multi-scaled vision of nature in the city. We sometimes talk about this as a whole of city approach. This is an image of Helsinki on the left, by the way, where you have this wonderful integrated green space network, and it's possible to move from a dense downtown and move all the way, walk all the way to old growth forests at the edge of that town. We frequently talk about this vision as a matrix of urban nature. So there's a continuum, of course, from indoors to outdoors. We certainly do want to bring nature inside. We also want to do what we can to overcome the barriers between indoor and outdoor nature. But a lot of our agenda is more kind of on the right side of this slide, and moving from, again, seeing a city as a place where there are discrete pieces of nature to a system and an ecosystem of nature. Let's see. So we frequently, talk about nature spaces. There are so many places, really, every space in a city where you could grow something is a place where there is the possibility for nature. And our cities and our network show a real continuum, a real range from tiny nature in a living alley, or nature in the form of a sidewalk garden, all the way out to larger regional networks of open space. We believe that a biophilic city is also one that emphasizes awe and wonder. In fact, I'm frequently defining a good city or a biophilic city as a place that maximizes moments of awe. So these are images from another film. There's a wonderful New York nonprofit called Gotham Whale, And I'd love for you to watch this film as well. It's about the return of humpback whales to the waters of New York. But what a way to define a good city, a place where you might catch a glimpse of a whale or a dolphin as you're riding to work on a ferry, or something you might see from your balcony. And so there are so many possibilities for experiencing awe in a natureful city, and it can be a very meaningful part of our lives. Again, we believe that this vision of future cities has to make room for many other forms of life. These are images from Cura de Bat, another one of our partner cities in Costa Rica, where they have a sweet city program, and they're doing wonderful things to plant native species of plants and pollinators, pollinator gardens all throughout the city, and creating these bio corridors. And the image on the left is a recent Guardian story that talks about the mayor, the original mayor who sort of envisioned the sweet city program, likes to talk about giving citizenship to bees and plants and trees and birds. So we have wonderful stories of our cities that are working to coexist with nature. Back to Singapore, many of you probably know the story of the smooth-coated otters in Singapore. There are now more than 80 of them, and I think 12 different families. They've returned to this very dense, heavily developed city-state. And they are beloved. It's not without some conflict, but I think everyone realizes, or most residents realize, that their lives are enhanced by having the possibility of seeing an otter during one's day. And it's also a lesson in how you create more biodiverse cities, because the image on the left is the Kalang River, actually, and Bishan Park, which has been converted from a storm channel, essentially an engineered storm channel, into a natural meandering biodiverse river. And it's actually thought that this restoration project is a lot of the reason why the otters have returned. So we have another film about the otters, I think 7 or 8 minute film on our webpage as well. Do take a look at that. Edmonton, Canada is another one of our partner cities. Wonderful planning story there. They have emphasized ecological connectivity in their plans. This idea of everything that they do in this city being evaluated by the ease with which an animal can move through the city. So they've now built their 27th wildlife passage through the city for every sized animal you can imagine. We talk a lot about wildness and the importance of wildness in cities, and future cities have to be wild. And I think that's one of the stories behind the pandemic. And it's certainly actually one of the stories behind what we're finding in places like Singapore. Singapore went through a really interesting period, an unexpected lockdown, in which the normal, I'm telling you a story that doesn't relate very well to this particular slide, but all the normal sort of cutting of the grass, the maintaining of the landscaping couldn't be done. And a lot of it is done by in-parks, the National Parks Board. And what happened was that residents saw the city in a different way, and they've actually come to realize that maybe they like the wilder result, and they certainly like the birds and butterflies and other critters that seem to be more present in those wild spaces. So everything and anything we can do to rewild cities is a really important part of our vision. So here is yet another film for you to watch, but this is Perth, Western Australia. Wonderful story of the conversion of what was a sterile water feature in the middle of Perth, sterile, energy intensive, chlorinated, nothing living in it, to what is today a remarkable native diverse wetland. Anyway, it's a wonderful story. That rewilding can happen in lots of different ways. Vitoria-Gasteiz, the capital of the Basque Country in Spain, has been a partner city from the beginning. This is a wonderful stream a daylighting project that's bringing nature into the center of their city. So this was actually a small river that was in a pipe underground, and they brought it back to the surface, and it's become a very popular gathering space. Okay, I'm quickly running out of time. I'm going to shoot for ending in about 10 minutes, and then I'll we'll shift over to Carla. So one part of the vision, a really important part of our vision, is what we sometimes call just biophilia, a recognition that, especially in American cities, there has been an unfair distribution of nature, and that we have systemic racism, we have segregated land use policies and patterns. That means that in cities like Richmond, Virginia, which you see here, even though there's a wonderful wild river, not every person in every neighborhood gets to enjoy it in the same way, and especially neighborhoods of color often don't have the same access. And it's true as well for trees and tree canopy. And we know that tree canopy cover follows pretty closely the redlining maps. So those areas of the city that haven't gotten the same investment, have been discriminated against, are also the places where you have lower levels of tree canopy, and they're the hottest places too. They're high on the heat vulnerability index. So the image on the left actually is the new draft comprehensive plan for the city of Richmond. Richmond is now in our network, and they are taking this on, and they have established minimum tree canopy targets for all neighborhoods, and they are emphasizing investments in neighborhoods that need it the most, and especially neighborhoods of color. And LeVar Stoney, actually the current mayor, has made this a priority. And in fact, these are images actually from the fall, and he's created 5 new parks in the city to address this unjust circumstance. So Pittsburgh is also in our network, and this is an image just to sort of show you the ways in which we can think about nature in a heavily built a city. And it is those human design things. It's water, it is parks, it's trails, it's birds, it's looking at that bridge and the other kind of built aspects of the city, and recognizing that there's nature there as well. So in 2013, we officially started this network of cities, and we had these 10 initial cities. We now have 25 cities. Toronto is the last official city to join as a partner city. Actually, Lima is we think soon going to join as well. And there are probably 100 other cities we've been in conversations with. There is a protocol for joining, and all of that is on the webpage if you have an interest in that. We're heavily North American and European, as you can sort of tell in this map, but we are hoping to have cities in the network from around the world, especially Africa, and we have one city in Australia. We're hoping for more cities, and Chinese cities as well. So it will be hopefully a truly global network, and it is definitely gaining in traction. And this vision is gaining traction. Usually I show up when a city joins and deliver the certificate. This is Mayor Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh, who's been a big supporter of the network. And there's often a celebratory event. We had a wonderful event at the Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh, and we often get very good press when this happens as well. So can tell you more about the cities. I'm running out of time. I've got about 5 minutes left, but again, there's a lot of information on the webpage. This is just a little quick snapshot of what some of the cities are up to. The way they each see themselves, the way they envision themselves is different from city to city, of course, and the opportunities to conserve, protect, celebrate nature will vary from city to city, and climates are different. The ecology is different, but what ties them together is this, this key commitment to putting nature at the center. So there are metrics. We believe that a biophilic city is not just a city that is natureful, not just defined by the presence or absence of nature, but rather by the various ways that residents interact with that nature, right? So it's how much do they care about that nature? How engaged with that nature are they? And the ways that a local government relates to that nature. How much are they investing in nature? So there are metrics on the webpage, and happy to circle back to this and talk in more detail. So the last thing in my remaining 4 minutes is to basically make a small pitch for a particular version maybe of a biophilic city, which is this concept of a bird-friendly city. And this is my newest book on the right. It just came out in the fall. And we had a good story in Fast Company in February about it. And it basically argues that every city can and should be bird friendly, and what we do to design cities that are good for birds will also make them good for humans, right? And the pandemic, I won't go into these slides, but I think for a lot of us, nature has been a saving grace. It's been a balm. It's been a steadying force in our lives at a time of turmoil. And a lot of people have discovered birds and are watching birds and are listening to bird song. We're literally hatching a new generation of bird lovers and bird enthusiasts. And the evidence, to me, is pretty compelling. And it's everything from the amount of money that we're spending on bird seed to downloads of bird identification guides. And just anecdotally, so many people have told me how important birds are. So there's a whole story about how cities can be profoundly more bird friendly, and it means thinking about design and planning through the perspective of a bird. These are images back to Edmonton, where they're using circuit theory to do land use planning. So this is basically electrical circuit theory, circuitscape modeling to see where there are blockages and where there are points where a chickadee would not be able to move around and through the city. And I have been a big fan, a big advocate for designing everything that makes space for other forms of life and birds especially. So this is a story from the book. A chimney, and a reconstructed a chimney in London, where they've designed in 54 nesting spaces for common swifts. And it's part of a sort of larger idea of designing everything. And it's native plant gardens, and it's bird-friendly windows, a lot of things that we need to do. But we're moving in the direction of reimagining buildings and building facades. And I love Joyce Wong's wonderful work around habitecture, so kind of rethinking building facades as multiple habitats for multiple species. So I've got about a minute left, and I'm going to stop. But there are a lot of elements that go into making a bird-friendly city. So my last slides are just to sort of wrap up the Biophilic Cities Network. Do take a look at the page, the web page. We do many things. We have monthly partner city calls with our partner cities. We organize events. We have an online journal, which you see here. All of the issues of this journal are on the web page to see. Is a remarkable collection of good practice and stories and inspirational stories of what cities are doing. All of these films, this is an image from a 45-minute film that we did about Singapore. It's also on the webpage. We do work with our partner cities. This is a biophilic neighborhood design workshop that we did in Pittsburgh in February, just before the pandemic happened. Our cities are doing many things together, and this is one image from San Francisco. They're hosting delegation from Singapore, two partner cities, and actually Singapore wanting to learn about San Francisco's bird safe design standards, the first American city actually to adopt mandatory bird safe design standards. So this is my last slide. I think there are a lot of resources. We have books, we have full length films. This is another very recent book, the Handbook of Biophilic City Planning and Design. And actually Carla had a big role in helping on that book. And it's just recently been translated into Chinese. So there is the web page. Hooray. Okay, that was all very fast. So Carla and I will, at the end of Carla's presentation, hopefully there'll be time for questions and discussion, and maybe some of the things I showed you have maybe stimulated you to, or will stimulate you to ask some questions or make some comments. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, Carla, and let you take over. And you've got a very biophilic building in your filter or in your.
Do you recognize it?
I don't know that I do. Where is it? Singapore?
It's the Singapore airport, our last biophilic city.
I was looking at it and I was thinking it was from the outside. I was thinking it was an exterior shot. Yeah, I see now.
Terrific. Okay, do you see my, can't really see what you're seeing now. Do you see my slides?
We do, I do.
Terrific. Well, I'm Carla Jones-Harrell, and I've been working with Tim now on Biophilic Cities since pretty much the beginning of the project. And I learn something new every time I hear him present. So there's so much growth in this area, and it's really exciting. I have a background in public health, health policy, and urban planning. So I'm going to expand on Tim's presentation by discussing how we might use theory and practice of biophilic cities to improve public health for the future. I'm going to begin by discussing the importance of cities for health, describe how urban nature benefits mental health, physical health, and overall well-being, summarize how we may use urban nature as a tool for public health protection and promotion, specifically through a case study of the COVID-19 pandemic that we all are well aware of, provide some questions that Tim and I have been thinking about, and then also invite you to post some questions. And finally, I have a few additional resources as well. So I want to begin by starting that health is produced at a variety of scales. It's important for us to consider all of the scales that produce health, from global ecosystems to our individual behaviors and genetics. And it's all of these scales that interact to provide opportunities for health to flourish, or provide environments that are detrimental to public health. You can see here that urban planning has a role in many of these. So while urban environments can provide access to many amenities, including health services, urban life can also lead to many undesirable health effects. Highly urban, nature-deprived environments exact a psychological toll on well-being. The major environmental triggers for physical and mental illnesses are also highly associated with urban environments, including exposures to extreme temperatures, especially heat that Tim mentioned, chemicals, noise, and pollution. Because environmental stressors tend to be more prevalent in urban environments, city residents are obviously more exposed to them. Long-term stress exposure often depletes adaptive reserves and breaks down physiological processes, which ultimately leads to a higher susceptibility of disease. So in urban environments, without time for rest, the body is constantly pressured by negative environmental stressors that are wearing on the immune system and leads to many negative health effects. In the literature, this has been often called the urban health penalty model. Many studies have examined this issue, such as a study in the Netherlands that looked at the relationship between the prevalence of psychiatric disorders and various levels of urbanization, and found that the prevalence of psychiatric disorders increased as urbanization increased. The paper entitled Health and Wellbeing in a Changing Urban Environment, which is listed here, um, you can see that the components of the system shows different stages of development within cities and some health issues that are characteristically associated with that. And I think this provides a really nice framework for thinking through how our environments influence public health. So you can see here with the diagram that's on the right, different components of these systems, including food systems, infrastructure, access to resources. And I would argue that these are all within the role of an urban planner and sort of what we may be thinking about as we're creating plans, policies, and programs. So where does urban nature fit in? So maintaining and promoting public health depends on the health of other human beings, as we've seen now with infectious diseases, but also with the health of other ecosystems that we're in. So studies in various fields have examined the restorative effects of nature on human health, and given the negative toll that many urban environments can have on health, examining how urban nature is associated with health behaviors and outcomes to promote health, and understanding what levels of exposure to nature are meaningful is really significant. Quantitative measures such as heart rate, blood pressure, brain electrical activity, and skin conductance have been widely used and have demonstrated the positive effects of nature. So in the handbook of biophilic cities and design that Tim mentioned, he proposed this model for proposed pathways of influence from urban nature to improve human health. For example, you could follow one pathway of urban nature leading to increased walking and physical activity, which leads to reduced stress reduction, which then leads to positive health outcomes. Research has supported another pathway mentioned here, such as those that are engaging in exercise while in natural environments. It's called green exercise, have demonstrated a significant difference in positive self-reported emotion. And researchers argue that these benefits primarily result from an individual's feeling of connection to nature through experience, where connection to nature is a causal mechanism for the generation of psychological benefits because of the power of feelings associated with belonging to a community or something greater than oneself. High quality urban nature is also associated with many physical health benefits, including reduced air pollution through tree planting and other plantings, decreased temperatures that offset the urban heat island effect that Tim talked about. Greater tree canopies have been found to be associated with preventing skin cancer with shade. The benefits of urban nature have been associated with cardiovascular health, improved outcomes with diabetes and other chronic health conditions, and associated with reduced mortality, those that have greater access to nature. Studies by Barton and Pretty and others have demonstrated that exercise in natural environments is associated with increased duration and intensity of physical activity when compared to exercise in indoor environments. And lastly, natural features in cities have often been perceived to be less safe, but research has actually shown many associations of urban nature with reduced crime. This protection in crime can improve the likelihood of residents actually getting out and exploring natural areas. We often talk about in biophilic cities about dark skies and the importance of lighting so that we can connect with the sky above us. And the argument for often using brighter, more harmful lights is for safety, but actually we have a colleague who's shown that that's not the case. Studies have also shown that urban nature has vast benefits for mental health, particularly anxiety, depression, and reducing stress. So one study found that a 1% increase in the proportion of usable or total green space resulted in a 4% lower rate of anxiety and mood disorder treatment. It's also shown that higher amounts of green space within a 1 kilometer or about 0.6 of a mile distance resulted in 25% lowered risk of anxiety disorders in the overall population. And there was an even stronger association found among children and people with lower socioeconomic status. A study in the UK found that individuals who lived in areas with the highest amount of green space had lower levels of cortisol, and their self-reported feelings of stress were lower than those who spent more time in urban settings without green space. Research conducted by Bayer et al. Found that higher tree canopy coverage was strongly associated with lower levels of symptoms for depression, anxiety, and stress. Not only that, but appropriately placed green spaces can also reduce noise levels that are often associated with stress in urban environments. So Tim discussed this idea of flourishing, which is what we want to move toward. So thinking about well-being, higher biodiversity has been linked with various measures of psychological well-being. We also know that nature has been associated with increased social cohesion, which social cohesion is linked with various physical and psychological health benefits. The presence of urban green spaces can encourage positive social interactions that cultivate this social cohesion in ways that enhance health. So research has shown that the relationship between nature and health suggests that social cohesion is influenced by the presence and quality of urban green spaces like parks and forests. A review found that social cohesion and increased social contacts were a major pathway through which the natural environment supports health, which is what was in the model that we looked at earlier. So there are lots of ways that when we're interacting with nature, we're also able to interact with each other and promote social capital and social cohesion. Another study among visitors to neighborhood parks in New Orleans noticed that participation in park organizations led to stronger perceptions of social cohesion, and how this higher level of social cohesion can actually go on to facilitate participation in clubs and organizations within the community. And lastly, Tim touched on just biophilia. Green gentrification is a term that was coined to describe what happens when areas that enhance a lot of their natural features leads to the displacement of disadvantaged populations. Research has shown the need to be just green enough, or to really put in some safeguards to keep green space equitable. A study found that low-income neighborhoods with large amounts of green space have cardiovascular mortality rates similar to those of wealthy neighborhoods. So urban nature can really provide a protective effect where oftentimes a lot of these SES characteristics are associated with negative health outcomes. So two other studies found that higher tree density in urban areas is associated with a decreased risk of childhood obesity, as well as depression and type 2 diabetes among low-income families. In sum, nature has many benefits for human health and well-being, and also provides many of the ecosystem services that Tim mentioned. So it's really a win-win for all. So I want to talk a little bit about infectious diseases, since a lot of what we've been talking about are kind of chronic conditions. The 21st century has so far seen SARS starting in 2003, the avian flu, swine flu, MERS, Ebola, and now COVID-19. Some have speculated that we are entering an era of pandemics. So how might we design the cities of the future, cities of tomorrow, to be safer, more habitable, more enjoyable places to live? Demographic shifts in the past century have really escalated the difficulty in containing a pandemic. And the rise of globalization and urbanization have facilitated the rapid spread of viruses. We at Biophilic Cities have been collecting news articles and research on how cities are really encouraging connecting with nature during the pandemic. So let's dive a bit deeper into how the value of nature is being used during this time. And we have a web page that I'll put in the chat if you're interested in checking out more of those articles. So how might we use nature as an intervention for physical health, mental health, and well-being during the pandemic? So research has shown that very fine particulate matter could carry the COVID-19 virus particles further. So diesel could be contributing to the spread, as diesel exhaust has been shown to carry other viruses. A study at the Harvard School of Public Health found that an increase in 1 microgram per cubic meter of air in long-term exposure to PM 2.5 was associated with an 8% increase in the COVID-19 mortality rate. Air pollution could either make people more susceptible to COVID-19 infection, or could actually be the vehicle that the virus uses to get into the lungs. But you can see how biophilic strategies can help reduce air pollution, as I mentioned earlier, and potentially help with future infectious disease spreads. We've also seen that with the lockdowns in many cities across the globe, one of the permitted activities has been outdoor physical activity. Research at the University of Vermont found that outdoor activities that have been seeing the largest increases often have to do with nature. So it includes watching wildlife, which has been up 64%, gardening up 57%, taking photos or doing other art in nature, and of course, as I think many of us have been doing, is spending more time walking through our neighborhoods, which is up 70%. Disruptions in the distribution chains have also led many to re-engage with gardening. So we've seen growths in urban agriculture as well. While we have seen increases in drug overdoses and other diseases of despair during the pandemic, many people have been trying to turn to nature as a coping mechanism to reduce stress. Research commissioned by the Mental Health Foundation in the UK has found that nearly 50% of respondents felt that spending time in green spaces has helped them cope with rising pandemic-related anxiety. And lastly, some cities have been experimenting with creating hubs of resources, making them more accessible by active transport. So even prior to the pandemic, there was this idea of the 20-minute neighborhoods that have caught on around the world in cities like Melbourne and Paris, which relies on this concept of being able to get your basic needs within a 20-minute bike ride or walk, and thinking about how we might be able to make many of those amenities based outdoors. So cities have been facing these public health challenges prior to the 21st century. Before the advent of germ theory in the 1880s, medical explanations for epidemics like cholera and yellow fever centered around the idea that miasma, or poisonous gases in the air, led to disease. But physicians then believed that vegetation, particularly tree canopies, could keep miasma and the associated diseases from spreading. Early American park designers, public health officials, and physicians therefore advocated for the creation of parks and planting of trees as public health measures. Some landscape architects, like Frederick Law Olmsted, argued, unfortunately, largely unsuccessfully, that urban parks and trees should be distributed evenly so that everyone would have easy access to nature. Although the physicians and designers were wrong about the causes of these infectious diseases, their plans to build parks and plant trees were correct in so many ways, not the least because of their various health benefits. So COVID-19 is showing us again that urban nature is a vital component of a comprehensive response to pandemics and disease. Access to nature is life-sustaining infrastructure and should be provided equally. Yet when we have a comparison between the 2019 coronavirus pandemic, 2019-2020, into 2021, and the 1918 influenza pandemic, we're seeing that the most widely available tools have remained nearly the same. Public health interventions have been and are still the first line of defense against a pandemic in the absence of a vaccine, such as social distancing. Understanding, though, that the environment plays a significant role in disease dynamics and in determining the health of individuals has always been an essential aspect to controlling and managing infectious diseases, and will only gain more traction. Emeritus Professor of History at Yale University, Dr. Frank M. Snowden, stated in an interview with The New Yorker that, quote, epidemics reflect our relationships with the environment, the built environment that we create, and the natural environment that responds. So how might we use nature in cities to prevent disease and encourage flourishing? A few ideas, and I'm sure you all have more, are one, better integrate public health, urban planning, social justice, and ecosystem science research and practice. In history, we've seen urban planning and public health as being intertwined. Remember, it was one of the catalysts for zoning and other planning efforts. So let's move toward better integrating all of these different disciplines and to come up with solutions for cities of the future. Another idea is to increase investments in public spaces that have one or more purposes. So we, as Tim said, let's create cities that are beneficial for both people and the environment. We want to have a win-win-win-win-win in any of these sort of initiatives that we're doing. Lastly, we need to prioritize nature-based solutions equitably. We need to be creative in preventing green gentrification, moving toward just biophilia, and providing equitable access to high quality urban nature. So it takes both access, but also the quality of those, of that nature. So with those ideas in mind, and certainly Tim nor I have all the answers, we have a few questions that we've been thinking about for the future of flourishing biophilic cities, and would encourage you to post any responses you may have to these or any additional questions in the chat. So the first is, how will our experiences with nature during the pandemic, for example, increased birding, shape our views of nature longer term? Could this shift provide more support for an even more ambitious future of biophilic cities? How might we continue and enhance the biophilic discoveries and innovations used in cities during the COVID-19 pandemic? What does a post-pandemic biophilic city look like? And lastly, how might technology advance our connection with nature in urban areas? So these are just a few things that we've been thinking about, and we welcome your questions or your thoughts and ideas.
Well, that was great, Carla.
Uh,
How do we want to handle questions?
Okay, so we have two questions that were written into the chat.
Okay.
I'll start with them, but before that, actually, I'll start with my own question and then we'll see how it goes. So I would like one of you or both of you to talk a little more about how we can actually ensure biophilia does not contribute to gentrification. What are some of the strategies that you've seen or you've come up with? So that's the first question.
Okay.
My second question is about biophilic buildings. So I've seen some of them. Actually, the one that comes to mind is Bosco Verticale in Milan.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful building. So, but one of the things that came to my mind, because I have background in architecture, it's very expensive to maintain that kind of building. And second, is this available to people of lower income? It's an access issue. Yes, it's great. It does wonderful things to health, but it seems only a few people have access to it. And the third thing is, are our construction and building materials ready to handle biophilic buildings? So if you can answer all of these together, however you want to answer them, and then we can move on to the questions people sent.
I'll let you go first, Tim.
Okay, well, first of all, I realize I'm not clear about how much time we have. When does the class end? We've got a half an hour maybe or so?
We have half an hour, but if you wanted to stay, and if there are people who want to stay and ask questions.
Okay, yeah, and I don't know, Carla, I'm happy to stay for as long as folks want to talk, but yeah, those are wonderful questions. So I'll start. Yeah, so as Carla mentioned, there's even language now that we use, like eco-gentrification or green gentrification. I think if we were to sort of pull our 25 partner cities, that would be a really important, a consistent concern. And so what can you do about it? And I mean, there are folks, Carla mentioned Just Green Enough. There's there have been people who basically argue we want to invest in nature in neighborhoods that will improve the quality of life for those people, but we don't want to invest too much, or gentrification will happen, and displacement will occur, and all of that. So there's some kind of a sweet spot there, and I must say I have some objections to that as a vision, and I think we do believe that nature is a birthright. Everyone is entitled to it. I don't think we want to aspire to just green enough. So I think we have to figure out how to invest in nature. One answer is that as we begin to do what Richmond is doing and other cities are doing, and we equalize that distribution of nature, some of those effects, those displacement effects may diminish. But we have some wonderful examples. Washington, D.C. is in our network, and I'm frequently talking about the 11th Street Ridge Park there, which is a project, a wonderful, very creative park that isn't even built yet. And even before it's built, they have engaged the neighborhoods around it. They have prepared an equitable development plan, actually, to make sure that folks in the neighborhoods around it benefit from the employment that it generates. They've created a community land trust as part of a comprehensive effort to protect the affordable housing in the neighborhood. It's a comprehensive strategy. So those are the kinds of things that we need to do. And so we've got to be thinking about those potential unintended consequences ahead of time, right? So there are other models. We have a film about a park called Cully Park in Portland, which is a wonderful example of an alternative way of designing and developing a park in an underserved neighborhood in that city, where it isn't just the parks department on high sort of deciding what this park will look like and feel like and function like. It's giving the neighborhood that ability actually to own it and to craft it. And so you've got kids from the neighborhood designing the raised bed gardens for, it's a community, one part of it is a community garden. This is another film, another 7 or 8 minute film that we have on the web page. So it's a really important question. I don't think we fully have the answer, but our cities are struggling with it, working hard. As a planner, I feel like we often don't have all the tools that we need to fully address it, and I think that's part of what we need to work on in the future. Carla, you want to chime in?
I was just going to mention that our partner cities, as Tim said, are very dedicated to this issue. And we've just launched a series of working groups where our partner cities are working together to come up with some strategies for these. And we have one on just biophilia to kind of think about how and come up with.
You mentioned the working groups,
some innovative ways that we might be able to overcome this, because it's certainly a challenge. Obviously, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've seen the impact of the Beltline on much of the city, and a lot of the strategies that were put into place to promote affordable housing and people staying in place were unable to sort of take place in reality. But I think coming up with different strategies to test out some of these ways, I think is it's hopefully something that will come from our working groups.
And so your other questions are wonderful as well. And so Bosco Verticale has certainly gotten lots of criticism and critique for a lot of reasons, and some wonder about, is that real nature? Is that a cosmetic, kind of nature? Will it function? Will it provide important ecosystem functions? And it turns out on some measures it does. For example, birds, actually surprisingly well for birds. Not perfect, not a perfect story. That Designers Walk project in Toronto, but you raise a good question. That Designers Walk is fairly high-end residential housing, and the designer and the developer will say yes, that's true. And but we're hoping that this plug-and-play tree system, they're vastly improving on the design of Bosco Verticale, actually, will be more universally applied in a whole variety of different kinds of housing. We do actually have wonderful examples of biophilic design principles that are applied in more affordable housing and social housing projects like Via Verde, for example, in the Bronx and in New York. That's a case study that we've been working on and monitoring and following for a number of years. Jonathan Rowe's project, actually multiple levels of forest, an orchard on one level, an evergreen forest on one level, food producing gardens on one level, and it's essentially low income and affordable units, some market units, but mostly affordable. So it's not a crazy idea that these design elements could not only be incorporated into more affordable housing, they could help to make that housing more livable and more affordable and healthier. Actually, the Via Verde project has a strong emphasis on health, actually. So your other question was building material, and that I'd love to have a conversation about more specifically what you have in mind there. I mean, I think we have various levels of development, various kinds of material that we have. I don't think that if looking at some of the WOHA projects, for example, a lot of things off the shelf now, and I feel like we don't, maybe the habitecture slide that I showed, there's still a lot of R&D and a lot of testing and work that needs to be done there. But I feel like that many of the design technologies like green walls and green rooftops that were more experimental 20, 30 years ago, they were fairly standard practice in parts of Europe, but experimental for American cities, have now become part of the norm. So a city like Washington, D.C., literally hundreds of green roofs, and that's a kind of mainstreaming of many of these biophilic design ideas that we're seeing across the country, across the world, for that matter. So I don't know if that's at least partially answering some of that.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
And I'd love to hear people's voices if they feel inclined to speak up. Is that putting them on the spot? So it's a little more conversational
so what we can do is the people who already
ask their questions.
So those who typed in their questions, I will unmute them.
They have to repeat it. They have to state.
they can ask it in their own words.
Okay.
So what I'll do is, I think the first person who asked was Gerald Phillips.
Gerald, hello there.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to unmute. Okay.
Putting her on the spot.
Okay, hey, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a great session. I happened to be listening to NPR's TED Radio Hour this week, and the focus was on flooding and resiliency, which is an area I'm spending a lot of time working in. But featured was a Hindi festival where an entire city is constructed temporarily to provide everything that millions of people who come to the festival need for 60 to 90 days, including infrastructure and housing, and at the height of the monsoon season. It's removed after the festival, and only biodegradable mats remain that wash into the river. It was used as an example it was suggested that this type of design could be used as an example for how future Olympic villages could be constructed and not leave a lasting footprint. And this seems like a temporal biophilic city concept. I was wondering if you had heard of this and if you had any thoughts on biophilia and temporal cities.
Wow. Carla, you want to start? We, by the way, we have one Indian city, Vishakhapatnam, and we're very excited that they're now in the network. But we hope to have many more. But go ahead, Carla.
No, that I think is a terrific point and something that we should be thinking more about. I'd love to hear Tim's thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know that we have anybody in the network that's quite doing that. I know a little bit about this story. It certainly is part of the larger trend of building things in ways that either can be disassembled and reassembled somewhere else or moved. My own background in coastal planning, years ago, we have programs like the New York State Coastal Management Program that had been designating zones for only movable structures. So the idea of being able to pick up your house, you only get to put it there if it's possible for you to pick it up and move it later. And a lot of folks in the design world, Bill McDonough, for example, who's been continues to work on this idea of a framing system that you assemble for one function and then you take it apart and reuse it again. It's part of his idea of cradle to cradle. So I think there's a lot of promise in that notion, and the whole idea of a city that's constantly moving and changing, and it pulls in the idea of pop-up parks, and we have a fair amount of work in cities like San Francisco, where they're creating little pop-up places that end up being permanent parks often, but there's a really important temporal dimension to cities generally, right? And why don't we figure out how to tap into that and create gentler, kinder development patterns and safer ones, and ones that do respond to the things you're interested in, and have little to no impact on that river, for example, or that water body. So it's a great idea, and I'll have to do some more pondering about maybe some better examples from some of our network cities. It's a great idea. By the way, Gerald is one of my students. This is how not that you look old, but
30
rather
years ago.
making me feel old. Right, exactly. So yeah. Anyway.
Thank you. I also
so Gerald,
yes.
Gerald, do you mind if I go through the other questions and you can come back and ask your second question?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Katie Grayson, would you like to, first of all, Carla, do you mind can you stop sharing so we can see everybody? Thank you.
Oh, good, yeah.
Okay, great. Katie Grayson, I would like to unmute you, but I can't see you on my screen. Can you raise your hand so that way? Oh yeah, I found you. Okay.
Hello. Hi. I'm not going to turn my video on because my lighting is a little bit strange. It's kind of dark in here. But I had a little bit more of a specific question. You mentioned something about the RVA master plan and how 100% of residents were going to live 10 minutes away from a park. And I was wondering if that was 10 minutes walking or driving.
It's a 10-minute walk. So
awesome.
this is becoming a standard metric in cities around the country, and partly because of the Trust for Public Land has had a 10-minute walk campaign. It sounds great. Actually, what we're promoting is more like a 1-minute walk or a 30-second walk. I mean, Carla may disagree with me here, but a lot of cities actually, in Seattle, 90-something% is within a 10-minute walk. It doesn't necessarily, we don't rest on our laurels there. And even a 10-minute walk, if you're 8 years old or 88 years old, is a significant thing. So actually, we've just written a story about a wonderful initiative in Philadelphia called Park in a Truck. And there's a landscape architect, Kim Douglas, who's come up with this idea, and it's basically, you know, how can we quickly and at relatively low cost convert vacant lots, and in Philadelphia has 40,000 vacant lots. It's a huge potential for creating little parks on every street, and the outcome is really quite striking. So I'm not 10 minute, that's a great threshold, but it's not even ambitious enough, I think.
Okay, great. iPhone, no name, it says iPhone has commented and recommended a book. It's called Invention Nature. So there's an Amazon link for anyone interested. So we'll go to the next question by Aaron. How does biomimicry in architecture, oh, sorry, Aaron, you can ask it yourself. So I'll find you on the screen. I can't see Aaron.
I think I'm unmuted. Hi there.
Hi there.
Hi. I was wondering how the biomimicry within architecture, how that plays in. I don't think that's necessarily biological the way that biophilia is, and also with regards to cost and working with, you know, if not cities themselves, sort of private developers, you know, what kind of, when you do get resistance, what's the basis of the resistance? So two questions, sort of.
Yeah. Good ones. Carla, you want to start?
I would say the biggest resistance we get when we're advocating for biophilic cities is usually cost. So, but we have there are a lot of there's a lot of research explaining the economics behind biophilia and how it's can be cost saving in other ways, and has quite a short payback period. I don't know if Tim wants to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it comes up. It comes up a lot less frequently in questions than it used to, and I'm not even sure I would put it as number one anymore. But what's happening, of course, is that many of these projects are proving to be wildly popular and highly profitable. So the example I showed of the Park Royal Hotel in Singapore, WOHA project, when it opened its doors, the hotel was able to almost overnight double their room rates. So many people wanted to be in that hotel because of its biophilic elements, and it's really a wonderful experience. I mean, you feel like it's a hotel in a garden. That's what they call it. Now that's not necessarily a good thing, right? We don't want to raise the cost of everything, and certainly the cost of hotel rooms or the cost of housing, but it made it really easy, or relatively easy, for the architects to sell those ideas to the client. And I mean, that's a consistent story that we hear. And so, in this, Carl is saying many of the things that we argue for or advocate for have a really quick, almost an immediate payback period, right? And the arguments are a little bit different when you're talking to a mayor, but the payback period, the payback to the return on investment, for example, of planting trees, and you can talk about it in terms of many of the health outcomes that Carla mentioned, or life expectancy. You start talking about life expectancy, it's pretty compelling, and so it overcomes a lot of that resistance in terms of upfront costs connected with things. Your question about biomimicry, lots of overlap there, a lot of harmony. And in this initial Biophilic Cities book, there are sections about biomimicry and some of the best examples of biophilic design. Biophilic buildings also have biomimicry elements to them. They certainly have a lot of design work that's inspired by nature, and we've gotten to know Janine Benyus pretty well, and all the wonderful work going on by that group, and and we join forces where we can, and we, you know, where we can design a living wall that also, you know, functions like an actual wetland and cleanses and treats stormwater or gray water, for that matter. That building becomes, you know, we're modeling a natural system in the same way that the biomimicry folks are advocating for. So there's a lot of harmony, a lot of parallel between these movements, I would say. Was that your question? I guess is a longer conversation about our longer list of obstacles. I mean, sometimes for me, the bigger obstacles these days are lack of imagination, maybe, failure to fully envision what's possible in a neighborhood or a city. Sometimes it's about the existing code and the existing, you know, laws that get in the way of doing things that you really want to do and everybody wants to do. We have a colleague, Nina Marie Lister in Toronto, who decided to convert her yard into a native, you know, pollinator garden, a native plants garden, which what we want everybody to do. But it turns out there's a tall grass and weeds bylaw in Toronto, and so she was in violation of the law. I mean, it's just crazy in a city that has a biodiversity strategy, and you know, that's sometimes a problem. Those kinds of things. So anyway, there's a longer conversation about, but increasingly, I think the cost issue. There is the maintenance and the question actually. Matoch, you asked, I think, that often comes up as well. You've got all this wonderful these green elements in the building. Who waters them? Who cares for them? Who's responsible for them? And that can be an obstacle.
Okay, our next asker is Gabriel. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Davis. I'm currently a senior at Brown University, New Jersey, and I'm writing my senior term paper on biophilic urbanism. And doing some research, I found I was increasingly interested in children and their exposure to nature and how important it is in their cognitive and physical development, and how nature deficit disorder is now a really huge problem. And I was reading this study in Australia, how it was saying how children's exposure to nature is now being limited more to their front yards because the world is becoming progressively more and more unsafe. And cities more recently have been viewed as being unsafe places. But as we saw in this presentation, biophilic urbanism can decrease crime rates in cities, right?
Right.
So how do we put more of our focus on making our private property greener, more biophilic, or are we going to transform cities into this new kind of safe haven so children can get out and play and even socialize more than they would, especially now because of COVID? Children in school, I worry like they're missing out on really important years of social development. So how do you handle that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Carla, do you want to start, or?
I say both.
Yeah, I don't think it's you don't want to choose necessarily, but yeah, I mean, well, go ahead. You start and I'll chime in.
No, I was just going to say our cities have, I think, had a really nice balance between the two. I'm thinking of St. Louis, Tim, and then Milkweeds for Monarchs, and how they were encouraging private or just residents to plant milkweeds on their property, and how that actually sparked such a great interest in the monarch sort of population there. And so that's one initiative of where the cities have been promoting private property owners, or even I think renters could participate in the program to sort of enhance and connect with nature within their property, but connected to the larger community. I would also say just that, we are looking at this from a global scale in cities across the globe. And so wanting to think of this more holistically too than just individual sort of parcels of land, but sort of how they all connect. So that's how I came up with the both answer. We
Yeah.
want kind of working in both directions.
No, it's a good answer. And from the perspective, as Carla suggests, of moving us in the direction of a biodiverse city, those private spaces are really going to be important. And from a bird perspective, for example, we really want every front yard, backyard. We want all those spaces to be bird habitat, and they can deliver a lot of benefits. As Nina Marie Lister in Toronto talks about, I've got birdsong for my whole neighborhood. And but at the same time, what you're suggesting is right, that we want a safe, child-friendly, walkable, sort of city. We want a city where there can be free-range kids, right? Or as my friend Peter Newman says, feral kids. Free range isn't good enough. We want feral kids, and they ought to be able to wander around and do all the things I did as a kid. This is what Rich Louv talked so much about, and we have wonderful examples of progress in that way. You mentioned the fact that we have evidence now. We know this evidence, the studies from Philadelphia. When you plant trees on vacant lots, the neighborhood becomes safer. So investing in nature is going to lead. It's not the only answer, and it can't be the only thing, but it will lead. It will help to lead to safer neighborhoods where kids can spend time. Another part of this, by the way, I don't know if you know about the Children in Nature Network, which Rich Louv started, but it's a wonderful resource, and they have a big annual conference, and they have it's a whole bunch of people. We intersect a little bit with them, and Rich Louv is on our board, and he founded this network, and he has a special interest in kids. So we have a lot of stories around schools, which would be interesting to you, I think. So another film that we have on our film page is the Chattahoochee Hills Charter School, just outside Atlanta. Carla's laughing at my stumbling on the word, but this is her backyard. But it's a wonderful story. It's again 7 or 8 minute film about this charter school designed for kids to be outside. And it's not one building; it's 5 different buildings. All the kids come with their boots and their coats, and their day is about time outside, and they take their math assignment out to the forest. And so we interviewed these kids. And they told us things like several of them want to be farmers when they grow up. You almost never hear this, from little kids. And partly because they are growing food, and it's a farm, actually. That's part of what they're modeling at this. So I think, we got to rethink all those kind of ways that we're doing the way, the early exposure and the way we're teaching kids. In every school, this is what's happening in Paris and a lot of other places. Schools are being converted into nature hubs, and that's a really good trend. And what will help to make that neighborhood and that city more child-friendly and safe. So good points.
Next is Hope. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Hope.
Hi.
I asked a question about like LEED building certification, and if that was like something that was like pushed like for the cities that have joined like the programs, or if it was like something that they like kind of chose to do on their own.
Yeah, it's not something that we push. I mean, we certainly recognize that LEED certification is a good thing, and there are certainly implications for greening buildings, and you get points for things like green roofs and green walls. So it's good. I'm actually a bigger fan of the Living Building Challenge. I don't know if you know about that one, but it's a much stronger standard, and buildings have to, like the Phipps Conservatory Center for Sustainable Landscapes is a living building certified living building, and if you look at our film, I feel like I'm promoting all our films. I am. It'll talk about that, but it has to produce as much energy as it needs. It is so net zero energy, net zero water, and you know it's a very rigorous standard that requires that you demonstrate performance over time. Those are all really good things, but again, we're not a certification group, so to join the Biophilic Cities network is an aspirational network, and we don't want to be certifying that you're a biophilic or not. That's not what we're about doing. So yes, green buildings tend to be part of the package of things that most of our cities are pursuing. And they're, you know, and again, it helps us move that biophilic agenda forward. But as I started with, you know, a biophilic city is more than just biophilic buildings. So it certainly is helpful to have more sustainable buildings. LEED certified is certainly helpful. But to answer your question, that's something that the cities would do on their own. It's not part of our, again, it's not a requirement for us.
I was just going to add that I think what's really great about the cities within our network is that we work with each one of them individually to come up with their own indicators for success. Since, as Tim mentioned, some are maybe in a more aspirational state where others might be refining certain initiatives and policies that they have, that we really tailor it to where we encourage them to dream big and aspire to be more biophilic in every way. And so that's part of, I think, what we're really emphasizing is this idea of everyone starting in different places and having different goals. The goals of Phoenix, Arizona are not going to be the same as Wellington, New Zealand, and that we can't measure them by the same indicators.
Okay, great. Our next asker is Alex Newton. You can unmute yourself.
I don't see where Alex is.
Yeah, I can't see Alex either.
Alex may have left. We may have scared them away, you know, asking them to it's one thing to type your question in the chat box, but then you have to.
There we are. Okay, sorry about that. Absolutely. So I'm a freshman at Virginia Tech currently. I'm taking a Creating Ecological Cities course. And I know that you mentioned earlier that when you have buildings that have like internal greenery and forests built into them, that, you know, someone has to be there to take care of them. So I was wondering, like, how are what is the percentage of new jobs created when you're doing this, not only in like constructing the city, but in maintaining it as well?
Wow. I don't know, Carla, that we have any particular. Yeah, it's a great question. We don't have any particular data or numbers to, but I think I think you can definitely, I would validate the premise of your question. It's, you know, and it ties into all of the stuff right now, the kind of pandemic, one of our cities, Austin, Texas, is creating a climate corps, you know, kind of employment and kind of a civilian conservation corps style employment program to do a lot of things, a lot of biophilic planting kinds of things like plant trees. And I think that this is Green New Deal, right? It's all stuff we've been talking about for months. I do think there's potentially a huge employment benefit connected to all of the things we've been talking about tonight, and groups like Majora Carter's, you know, founded the Sustainable Bronx, and part of that, and other organizations that are models for this too. But the idea of training people living in that neighborhood in the skill set of, you know, being an arborist or being a designer and an installer of green roofs, for example. There is a huge benefit, employment benefit. You're asking about maintenance specifically, though, I guess, and that's certainly a part of it. You ideally, we increasingly want ecological building systems that are sort of self-maintaining, right? That don't require you to go in and change out a lot of plants and do a lot of that. We're not quite there, but we do see systems, these new green walls that allow you to move the green wall and replace one plant rather than the whole thing. There are ways of in a way we're kind of, there's a tension there. We want employment, but we want to minimize the need for constant maintenance of green elements. But you raise a good question, I think.
Great, thank you so much.
I have muted myself. Okay. So now these are all the questions that were typed in. Gerald had a question and a few comments. So I'll just give you a chance to ask the question and share comments.
Sorry about that. Not really a question, but I think another great example of a biophilic city concept. New York City is doing some phenomenal stuff with their parks system and building it out, and just encouraging anybody who gets to New York to walk along the High Line. That is just a wonderful synergy of nature and architecture and getting people out walking through the city, through the buildings, but you're outside. And volunteers are employed to take care of that space along the way. It's an old elevated railway that's been preserved, and a walkway has been placed along it, and people just hang out or they walk along. It's completely free, and it connects to other green spaces in the city. So check it out next time you're in New York. And also in Virginia Beach, the Brock Environmental Center, I believe, is a winner of the Living Building Challenge. Thanks.
We have one question from, okay.
We have one hand up, I see, Marcel.
Yeah. Then I missed, I can't see it anymore. Oh, yes. Okay, I've unmuted you, Marcel.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I loved your guys' presentation today. What I was going to add on top of that New York thing is I would really look into Teardrop Park by Michael Van Valkenburg. That's like one of the best like naturalistic play environment. It's right by the 9/11 Old Trade Center, and it's a beautiful site and very similar to what Gerald was saying. Is awesome.
Yeah, actually, it's a wonderful example of designing a park, a wild park for kids too, because it's got these dramatic slides and things that are little hills and things that were designed to give it diversity. And actually, Robin Moore, I don't know if you know that name, but at NC State, who is probably the premier landscape design for kids guy in school design. He was involved in that design. So it's a wonderful example. New York has so many really great examples of things, so there's so much to see and experience there, definitely. But yeah, that's Battery Park, and this little park, right, sandwiched wild park in the middle of basically high-rise buildings all around it. It's really quite, I think, quite spectacular.
So someone asked, can you write down the name of that park?
Teardrop Park. And if you just Google that, I think you'll find a lot of you'll find a lot about it.
Okay. Great. It looks like this is all the questions. These are all the questions we have. If you have final points, Dr. Beatley and Carla, and and then we can end.
Carla, you want to start? All right, I can start, and I'll just say thank you, and the conversation was fun, and would love for you all to be involved in this in some way if you're interested, and that could be finding a role for you if you want to write an article for a Biophilic Cities journal, or maybe you are from a city that you think could benefit from being in the network. Let us know. You can go to the webpage and actually join as an individual. You just sign a pledge, and then you're part of the listserv, and you get all the material and all the announcements and so on. But yeah, we'd love for you all to be part of this movement and find a role. And just thank you for inviting us. Carla, I'll turn it over to you.
I agree. Thanks so much for having us. I was typing our email addresses, Tim, in the chat, and also the link to the website, biophilic.cities.org. I'll just echo that we have so many cities that have joined the network due to individuals committed to creating change and advocating for more natureful opportunities for natureful experiences in their cities. So I encourage you, if it's something that you're interested in, to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about Biophilic Cities anytime. So please don't hesitate at all.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us tonight and for the wonderful presentation and answering all the questions. So would like to say good night. So students, you can contact both. You have their email, and have a wonderful night, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Right.
You
See you
too.
all later.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
I thought that was